So Christy, we're going to have to go live.
Test my microphone. Can you guys hear me?
We are live.
I can hear you, Lisa.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Good
So
morning.
does that mean we're ready to bring this meeting to order, Justin?
We are
I'd
live. We're ready to go.
say so.
All right. Do we have any introductions?
Yes, please. That would be great. We've got a few new folks that are joining us. I'm going to start with Christy. Boy, Christy, I don't even know if I'm going to say your last name right. Is it Seyfried? And you're on mute. So Christy is our new administrative assistant for both the Technical Services Division as well as the Groundwater Advisory Committee. So you'll be seeing her name more often as she comes up to speed with helping us administer these meetings and such. And then we also have two new staff that we should introduce while they're here. So Kaylee, if you could introduce yourself briefly, and then Kelly, I'll have you do the same.
Yeah, good morning. I am Kaylee Worrell. I am the fiscal analyst for the Water Resources Department, and I'm excited to work with y'all.
Sorry, Kelly, we can't hear you. I don't see that you're muted, but I'm not sure if your mic's picking up. All right, well, how about this? I'll fill in. Kelly's one of our new rules coordinators. He's going to be working on the Division 10 rules. So that's something we've talked about in the past. Basically the process for the rulemaking of critical groundwater areas. So he's picking that up relatively well. He might be one of our newest employees. So happy to have him on board and getting back started on our Division 10 rulemaking. So that'll be a topic for a future round. I'll just ask Kevin to hold on one moment and we'll have him. Well, I guess that's a couple down. Kevin, why don't you just say hi real quick and give a real quick background to the committee and welcome. All right, and then Ken, I don't know if you want anybody else to introduce themselves. Those are the new folks that I think we haven't seen before, but we can go through a larger round or we can move on to our meeting summary approval.
No, that's probably good. I think we know everybody else, don't we? So, well, let's go ahead and approve the meeting summaries. Did everybody get a chance to read them and look at them?
Yeah.
I would entertain a motion then.
Move to approve.
I'll second that.
All right. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Well, and then next on the agenda is that start card fee update.
Okay, and for that, we've got Lisa Snyder here, the administrator of our Administrative Services Division, Kaylee, who you just met, and I'll turn it over to them.
All right, good morning, everybody. I will be presenting today, and Lisa's going to help me out by sharing the screen for me. Lisa, could you please go ahead and pull up the presentation?
I do need permission to be able to share my screen, please.
Yes, we will get that for you, Lisa, right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, you should have permission.
All right, I can see it. Can everybody else see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, welcome to the Start Card presentation. Lisa, let's go ahead and get started on the first slide. Okay, so Start Cards, they have legal limits that are set in the ORS 537-762 and 537-763. The fee is set in the ORS 537-762 subsection 5, and it is currently $350 as of January 1st, 2022. The historic fee rates are shown here, and the fee can only be changed by the legislature. The recent increase that we had in January was as a result of HB 2145, and that passed in the 21 legislature. So that was effective January 1st. And we will see some of the fluctuation from some of those fee increases in our later graphs. Next, we'll talk about the allocation of resources. The ORS 537-762 subsection 6 states that the fee revenue shall be paid into the Water Resources Department operating fund and can be used to pay the cost of the department to employ personnel to inspect wells and well construction. For the allocation of resources, you can see here it states that administration, they can't spend more than 5%. Technical, they cannot spend more than 20%, and field and enforcement, not less than 75%. This comes from ORS 537-763, and it further defines the use of the Water Resources Operating Fund where the Start Card fees are deposited, and to provide for payment for the administrative expenses for the Water Resources Commission and carrying out the provisions of 537-762. And those provisions for the not more than 5%, 20%, or not less than 75 comes from subsection 4. Here is a quick snapshot of the department budget for both 2019-21 and 21-23. Start Card fees are included in that second line where it states other funds including fees, along with other fee revenue and other revenues. Power and water fees make up around 5% of the total overall budget for the department. And I think with that, we'll take a look at the revenue, and then we'll look at expenses. So here are fee revenue projections for 21-23. A major portion of that 19 million other funds from the previous slide comes from fees like miscellaneous revenue, interest, or charges for services like gauging agreements or shared service agreements that make up the other portion not attributable to fees. Here's a detail of those 11.1 million fees. The Start Card revenue is projected to be about 2.04 million for this biennium. And the Start Card fees are about 1% of our overall department budget and just over 18.5% of our total fee revenue. And also this Start Card revenue supports between 8 and 11 FTE, and that's revenue dependent. Here we've got the historic count of Start Cards. According to our fiscal shop, here is the annual count of the fee activities. The counts are obtained by dividing the total of the Start Card fees received by the going fee rate of the time period. For this biennium, the first 6 months were 225, and then in January 1st, we saw that fee increase of 350. Since 2016, we've seen an uptick in the annual amount of Start Cards, and since then, we've had an average of about 3,500 a year. And then here we have the 13 years, and the average shown on this slide is about 3,100 a year. And if you see the monitor well rates, which are the blue, have been relatively flat, whereas there's been a fluctuation in the water wells. Okay. Here is the revenue comparison for the start card. Revenues have been steadily going up. You can see a bigger jump from 1921 to 21-23, and that's because of that fee increase from House Bill 2145. We're anticipating revenues as biennium to be around 2.04 million, like mentioned earlier. So yeah, that is that one. The next slide, we'll see the historic start card expenditures. Like I mentioned previously, we had a cap of 5% for spending for admin, a cap of 20% for technical, and then it can be more than 75% for field and enforcement. You can see here how our expenditures have been falling in those categories. Any questions so far? I'll take the silence as a no. All right, I think we're good to move on. Here are the projections for the 21-23 biennium. As you can see, our beginning balance is about $840,000. We're expecting a $2 million in revenue, and we expect to spend about $1.8 million. And that's going to leave us with a larger ending balance than we began with, and that's going to help us fund for our 23-25 biennium with that 1.1 million ending balance. For our start card summary, here you can see the start card revenue is about 1% of our budget. Start card revenues, I mentioned before, support about 8 to 11 FTE depending on the revenues. Over the last 5 years, we've been averaging that $3,500 or 3,500 start cards annually, and since 2009, there have been around 2,900, and then in 2022, we were seeing 3,700. With these updated numbers, we're going to expect to project 3,100 start cards annually. And that is based on our analysis that we've had in our spreadsheets. Are there any questions on that? Okay. Next slide is our historic exempt use. These are the additional fees that are related to groundwater and well construction. So you're going to see exempt use and our geotechnical fees. So on this one, per ORS 537-545, the fee here is $300 and is required to be submitted along with the map showing the exact location of the exempt use well on the tax lot within 30 days after the well is completed. HB 2145 requires this to be collected by the driller, whereas previously the landowner paid it. And then if we look at the expenditures, in 1921, the department noticed a decline in the start card ending fund balance. So the department managed to administratively manage the budget by shifting the start card funded position from groundwater to the exempt use fund. And so that's why you see an uptick in that 21-19. Here is the historic geotech revenue. This fee is $25 for the first hole in a location and then $10 for any hole thereafter. And then the historic geotech expenditures are the expenditures from that fee. Are there any questions for anything in this presentation?
I have a quick question just to satisfy my own curiosity.
Yeah.
What do you define as technical activities as opposed to field activities? How's that break made?
Yeah. Lisa or Justin?
Sure. So the field activities, that goes to pay for the salaries of the well inspectors that are out doing the well inspections, as well as we've got a couple new positions that are helping us review well logs, so that House Bill 2145, I think it was, one of the provisions there was that we were going to at least do a desktop review of every well log that came through the department. Technical staff, I believe, has traditionally been in the groundwater section in the technical services division. So that would be my staff, or, well, I think that's about it. And maybe Lisa can help me out who exactly that 14-15% is going.
Yeah. I believe that in the technical section, there's also one data tech,
Right.
but we have not filled that position recently.
Okay.
And a data tech, sorry, Marshall, is and folks are the folks that run the database in the background through our IS group and help keep the well log database up and running, the mapping tool.
Thanks.
Any other questions for him? If not, I guess we'll move on to Kevin with the stormwater artificial groundwater recharge project.
So maybe I'll do a real quick introduction on this. This presentation, we asked Kevin to come and chat with us based on comments from Richard and others in the group during the kind of open items discussion a couple meetings ago, where there was some interest in learning about an artificial groundwater recharge project using captured stormwater as the source water. So Kevin's going to describe for us the DEQ's oversight of the underground injection control program, as well as this particular application. So thanks, Kevin, for being with us.
Yeah, no problem. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Good. Sorry, I missed all the introductions. I could see everyone talking, and I usually use Teams, and so for some reason I wasn't hearing anything, but I think I've got it figured out now. So thanks for having me. Yeah, so I thought I'd give a little bit of overview on the, we just issued the UIC permit for the city of Beaverton. So kind of go over a little bit about that process, but also I know a lot of people aren't just familiar with the UIC program in general and what UICs are. They're all over the place, but they're kind of out of sight, out of mind. And so unless you're, in construction and building things or on that side of the coin, you don't see it a lot. So I'll give an overview of that too. So let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see. You guys all see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is the City of Beaverton Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project. And as I mentioned, we just, as of, I think it was like July 29th, this summer here, we issued the WPCF, that's Water Pollution Control Facility, UIC 1200U general permit. That's the type of permit it was. And so I'll go over what that is, different permitting options. I think as Justin mentioned in the notes and the agenda, this project is really unique in that it's the first one where we are using reclaimed stormwater and treating it and injecting it directly into an aquifer. Usually, with stormwater, that's a no-no. You usually want some vertical separation between the water table or the aquifer and the base of the UIC, so that there's attenuation of contaminants and things before it reaches the groundwater. So this was unique, and it was kind of, we didn't know initially when it came across, was how do we permit this? I know there's a way to do it. The only other project in the state that treats wastewater and injects it via UIC is actually, there's one other one in the whole state, and it's not stormwater. It's actually from the DEQ headquarters office in Portland. They treat the wastewater, all wastewater, from the whole building. It's like a 15-story building, and they actually have a mini like municipal wastewater treatment plant on site, and then it goes into UIC via injection that way. So that's the only other one that we had to go off of, for precedent. So anyway, I'll dive in. So here's the area map here. So here's the project in the middle with the star there. You can see the map on the right, the city of Beaverton, Highway 26 coming into Portland there. So you can see the star down below. It's way on the south side of Beaverton in a suburban residential area. The project is going to treat up to, well, on average, I think they can go up to maybe 50 million gallons a year, but the average is 22 million gallons a year is what they're going to do for this pilot project, see if everything goes as planned. And it's going to augment the city of Beaverton's irrigation use, as well as there's Summer Creek. I think they will do some stream flow enhancement and temperature control with that as well. The city currently uses potable water for irrigation, and this project alone could alleviate up to 50% of that annual potable water use. So it's pretty exciting for the city, and I think just for the state. We're starting to see more of these projects get talked about and come across our desk. I'll show you another example for Eastern Oregon at the end. But so that it's exciting, and I think if this works, it's a good way to use reclaimed stormwater for really beneficial uses. So there's 2 existing wells on site here, and they're deep. They're about 1,000 feet deep. One will be the injector well, so that on the DEQ side, that's what we regulate, is the injector, and then the other well will be used for extraction. And they're in the Columbia River basalt aquifers. And as I said, it's unique, first one in the state. So just I guess to jump back, just to get familiar with UICs. What is a UIC? And it's basically any well or device that has the sole purpose of injecting fluids into the subsurface via gravity or pumping. And usually this is it's a requirement, is that other disposal methods are unavailable. So if there's a municipal stormwater system that you can hook up to, that's the preferred method before you would go to a UIC or a wastewater treatment facility, something like that. Common types of fluid that are injected are stormwater, Oregon's wet. That is by far the most dominant fluid that utilizes UICs. They can be used for saltwater intrusion mitigation on the coast, groundwater remediation projects, brines associated with oil and gas production. We actually have one of those in Oregon. Spent geothermal fluids, that's not only for low temperature home use systems that are becoming more common, but also for the really hot geothermal fluids that are used to produce electricity, and also fluids for mineral extraction. And the main goal of our program of UIC regulation is obviously to protect the underground sources of drinking water. So a little bit of history on the program. The federal EPA UIC program was enacted in 1974 under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the EPA granted Oregon primacy over all the UICs in 1984 to regulate them on EPA's behalf. And so on the map, well, there's 6 classes of UIC systems. We currently in Oregon have primacy, so we regulate, we handle all the permitting and regulation over classes 1 through 5, and I'll explain what those are on the next slide. Some states, like the states here in blue, they rely still completely on the EPA for regulation. And some states, the ones in red, they only, and those are kind of the oil and gas states, they regulate just the class 2, which are associated with oil and gas production. And only 2 states, North Dakota and Wyoming, have primacy over all 6 UIC classes. And the class 6s are the carbon sequestration. And that's becoming a big deal for industry because they get carbon offset credits for dealing with that. We don't have regulatory authority yet in Oregon, but the EPA has asked us to start the process of getting primacy so we can do that. And there's money and funding to help the state do that. But currently only Wyoming and North Dakota have the primacy over those. And a lot of that, again, is also with the oil and gas industry where they're capturing CO2 from power generation and things and then putting it in depleted reservoirs. But we've been asked by landfills, big waste management companies, they're starting to get in on this game and want to start some of these projects too. So we'll probably see that coming down the pipe more. So class 1 injection wells, those inject hazardous industrial and municipal waste. They're deep underground. There is 800 of these throughout the US. They're most common in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast. You kind of have to have the correct geologic setting for that. These are banned in Oregon. We don't have them. Class 2 injection wells, as I said, they inject brines that are associated with oil and gas production. It's like steam flooding to enhance recovery. Those are class 2 injection wells. There's over 180,000 of those in the US. We actually do have one natural gas field, mist gas field. It's Columbia County, just west of Portland on the Columbia River. And their permit just expired in 2021 and they haven't renewed it yet. I think the field's pretty on its last legs. I don't know if they're going to again to renew it, but we have regulated that in the past. Class 3s, those are inject fluids for solution mining and extraction of minerals like uranium, different salts, metals. There are 18,000 or more of those in the US. Those are also banned here in Oregon, so you can't do that. Class 4 injection wells, those inject hazardous or radioactive waste into the shallow subsurface. Those were banned federally in 1984, but there is still an exemption for pump and treat groundwater remediation wells. And so we do have some of those. There's a number of them, like along the Willamette River in the industrial areas of Portland. So those, where the groundwater is so contaminated, they're pumping it to surface, treating it, and putting it right back in the same spot and just in a loop until hopefully the background quality improves. So those are still allowed. And then the most common one is the class 5 injection wells. So those are the stormwater disposal, construction drainage projects, landslide mitigation projects, aquifer storage and recovery. And there's, over 500,000 of those. and it's the most, it's allowed in Oregon, and as I said, the most common. And then the sequestration wells becoming more common, and we're starting that process to get primacy over that, because we're getting asked about it a lot. And so here's just a list. This is from an EPA report that we have to submit once a year, just on the numbers. In Oregon, there's, I think the last count was there's 46,000 some individual UICs that are active in the state of Oregon. Excuse me. You can see just by the numbers, 36,000 of those are stormwater. So 90% we deal with stormwater here, and then remediation, on-site systems, other, and then there's a little grab bag of like the special drainage type projects, landslide mitigation. Those are kind of the other buckets, but it's mostly stormwater. And so we're, with this project, we're talking about, we are talking about stormwater. So over the years, we've collected a lot of data, so we kind of know what the contaminants of concern in stormwater are. So you can see here, there's, the number of samples, pentachlorophenol, that always comes up. It's detected a lot, and it's causes the most exceedances. That's wood preservatives, so telephone poles, utility poles, railroad ties, the creosote type things. So it's pretty ubiquitous in the urban environments. So we see that a lot. Lead, with industrial activity, historic uses, paint, things like that. We see that a lot. It's detected a lot and results in a lot of exceedances. DEHP, that's from plastics. So we see that a lot. Benzopyrene, that's the next one, so exhaust, smoke, just, urban industrial things where there's a lot of people around. So that's what we see. So we do have a pretty good handle on what these contaminants that are going to show up are. And so this type of data helps guide when we're issuing permits, or for instance, this project, it helps with the permitting language on what things to monitor, and what the exceedance levels are too, so they can take action when they see something go wrong. And you guys just stop me, and if you want to ask a question or something. Okay, so there's kind of 3 registration pathways to getting a UIC registered or permitted. The most common way is rule authorization. And so this is an example from the city of Portland. This is a stormwater UIC. The city of Portland has 9,000 stormwater UICs. It's a lot, and they're in areas where they haven't built out their sanitary stormwater system, mostly out to the east. But this is a pretty good example of what they look like. There's a catch basin. It goes to a sedimentation manhole, and then after that, it goes over into the UIC and then infiltrates into the subsurface. With rule authorization, we don't allow direct injection into the water table. So there's got to be 5 feet of separation between the base of these things and the groundwater. You also, and yeah, these are for registering. Usually it's individual homeowners, small businesses, things like that. They're not usually, the numbers of UICs being registered at any one time are small, single digits usually. For rule authorization, you can't be within 500 feet of a domestic use water well or within the 2-year time of travel to a municipal supply well. So, and as I said, no direct discharge to groundwater. So 2-year time of travel is just when the contaminant, if a contaminant were to enter the UIC, that time it would take to get to that well, to the municipal supply well. So you can't be within those setbacks. And if you are, then that triggers a different permitting pathway. This rule authorization uses a tiered risk system. So low risk are just roof only drainage. If it's from your house, probably a number of us have them, that goes in, you see the gutter go into the ground. For single family dwellings, you don't need to register them. But if it's a apartment or a commercial facility, you do have to register those, but roof only is low risk. And then moderate risk is when you drain from any surface. So roof, but you've got parking areas or driveways, streets, things like that. And if you're a commercial, municipal, industrial, school district, something like that, you need to have a stormwater management plan also in place with that. So that's just dealing with how are you going to maintain your UICs? If you have a spill, what's your spill response protocol? If you have employees, how are you educating them and making them aware that there are UICs and that things could get into them? So avoiding that. And then the high risk are industrial commercial facilities that either store hazardous materials on site, or they have more than 1,000 vehicle trips per day. So think gas stations, big box stores, those type of things. And those require the annual sampling. So a minimum of the benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, I won't read it all, but pentachlorophenol, as I mentioned, the wood preservative, lead, and then metals, nitrogen, fecal, coliform. So we make them, and they have to send in their sampling results every year for that with an annual report. Okay, the next way, and this is the one that we're dealing with Beaverton. So as I mentioned, if you find that your UIC falls within the 500-foot well setbacks or the 2-year time of travel, then you have to go, the next step would be to go to this 1200U general permit. And it's a little bit, I think right now to register a single one, it's like $700 as compared to rule authorization is $100 and some dollars. So it's a little bit more expensive, and there's also an annual fee associated with it. Currently we have statewide permit coverage. So it's the permit shield that all 1200U UICs, they fall under that language. It was drafted in 2015 and it's going to expire in 2025. So we're starting to work on, hey, are we seeing different emerging pollutants that we want to add in for monitoring? How do we want to change the language? You know, we've gone to an online registration system. You're not mailing in hard copies applications. So there's probably some language that will change, but I don't think it will change too much. But these maps on the right here, you guys are aware of them for the water resources folks. The way that when you send in your application, the way you're determining whether you're within setbacks, there's a nice website for Water Resources Department that has all of the wells. So the ones in blue are water wells, purple are monitoring wells, the green ones are geotechnical boreholes. And you can actually put your UIC and then put a 500-foot buffer around it. And so that's how they're telling or determining, and the onus is on the applicant to determine this. But we double check, to ourselves when we see the applications. And if they see that there is a well within it, that's how they know to do the 1200U permit. And then also the 2-year time of travel or travel. The DEQ has a website called Facility Profiler, and it's got all of the existing UICs that are registered. And then like these yellow polygons here, those are the 2-year, what would be within the 2-year time of travel. So if your UIC is going to fall within that, that's how you would tell that. And I don't think I have the addresses. Maybe after this, I can share this presentation and I'll add a number of links and some of the relevant Oregon administrative rules too for UICs, just so that everyone has the language. I'll put that in there. The 1200U also, it's intended for small entities with less than 25 individual UICs, and they also have to be within contiguous tax parcels. So, you know, like a school district would maybe have things all over the city, but they're not contiguous, so that wouldn't really apply for them. And I'll talk about that too. But these permits require a stormwater management plan for the commercial, municipal, and industrial facilities. It also uses a tiered risk system. So if you're, again, over 1,000 vehicle trips per day, you store hazardous materials on site, you're going to be required to monitor as well for different analytes. Also requires a land use compatibility authorization from the local zoning authority. So they've got to file that with the Public Works Department or someone within the city or municipality. And because it's within these setbacks, it also requires a groundwater protectiveness demonstration. And so a number of municipalities have already commissioned these studies, and so individuals within those boundaries, they can cite those, so they don't have to commission their own. But basically, it's some of them use saturated zone models, some of them are unsaturated Beto zone models. To be safe, or in the saturated model, what's the horizontal distance that the contaminants would go. And so a lot of cities have commissioned both saturated and unsaturated fate transport models. And I would say on average, probably in the saturated zones, the horizontal distance, by the time you get out past 250 feet for most stormwater pollutants, they get attenuated by then, or at least that's what's being modeled. There's very few studies that do direct measurements of that yet. There is one that's getting started at Oregon State, which should be really interesting because they're actually going to test it and not just model away from the UIC. Yeah, it's about 250 feet. And then vertically, most of them, if you're over about 3 feet vertically in the unsaturated zone, the things are usually attenuated. At least that's what's been modeled. Let's see, and then the last one, which we don't have to go too into it, but it's the UIC individual permit. These are intended for entities with a lot of UICs, so like this, mostly for the municipalities. You can see a list of some of the permit holders on the right there, and it's mostly cities. And usually this, like the 1200U, eventually a number of their UICs are going to be within well setbacks. So they've got to do the groundwater protectiveness demonstration. It requires annual reporting and any changes to their system-wide assessments, new additions, retrofits, what they've closed. They've got a monitoring plan and a sampling plan. So they've got to submit all of those results every year. That's by far the most expensive. I think the application is about $17,000, and there's a public comment period. It's much more involved process on the application side, and then also on the reporting and monitoring side. So those are the three ways. So when we got this City of Beaverton application, it was like, oh, we've never done that. Which one do we use? Do we need to have public comment on this, and what we came, it's not rule authorized because you can't just inject directly into the groundwater. So we knew it wasn't that. And so we settled on, and they kind of had this pathway going too, but we settled on the 1200U general permit. And so the justification for that, back to the enough about UICs or the overview here, but the justification for the 1200U, the ASR, so there's two wells here you can see on the map. There's the injector well, and then there's the recovery well, this ASR 3A. That well was originally when it was drilled, was deemed a domestic use water well. So that's something that comes up a lot for us too, is like someone will say, yeah, but they're not using that well for drinking. They're just watering their lawn with it or whatever. But you know, on the original start card, that's what was checked. And so officially it is a domestic use well. Someone could go back in 10 years from now, I guess, and use it for that. So so this, you can see the distance is about, I think they're about 40 feet apart. So it definitely falls within the setbacks. So that's one mark for using the 1200U. The ASR3 well, the injector, it's going to emplace the treated stormwater into the Columbia River basalt aquifer. As I said, these can't be rule authorized. We decided it doesn't need, it's just a couple wells. We didn't need to go through the rigmarole of the individual permit process. You know, and it's because it's less than 25 UICs. If the City of Beaverton had already had an individual permit, like those other municipalities, we could have just added this onto their inventory and maybe just added it to the annual monitoring sampling requirements, but they don't have an individual permit. They don't really use UICs for that. They've got their municipal system that they use. So that wasn't an option. So that's the justification. Initially, they did extensive studies to determine the local stormwater chemistry. So it's kind of similar to like the sampling results that I showed you earlier that we've collected just from all over the place. And so they went and looked at kind of what are the local concentrations for this particular suburban area. So they did that work. They also did background groundwater quality. They did analysis on that, so that we have a baseline of what, because as I mentioned, one thing you can't do by Oregon law is degrade groundwater quality. You can't do that. So we now know from them what the background water quality is here. And so what we need to, the bar is set for when we inject or when they inject, what they need to be above. Also, it was important because there's, for mixing, you know, you're putting in different fluid that isn't the native groundwater. So you don't want to inject something that's then going to precipitate out minerals and possibly degrade the aquifer that way either. So they did a number of studies on that, and they think they should be good. Yeah, so that they covered that for the background quality. For the groundwater protectiveness demonstration, this is also very unique because we usually do fate transport contaminant models, and that's the protectiveness demonstrations. But this is, you're just directly injecting. So the only way to be protective is to treat it. And so that is what they did. These are the well bores here. So you can see, as I said, they're about 1,000 feet deep. There's the open intervals are here. There's some screened intervals on the recovery well, and then the casing up towards the top. And as I said, these wells are within 50 feet of each other. So, you know, a pollutant fate transport model, I mean, they're so close, they're gonna interact, and contaminants would probably be going back and forth here.
Question?
Yeah.
The numbers, I just wanted to back up a slide. You don't have to necessarily, but the numbers, those are, I'm assuming those are pre-treatment analyses of the stormwater. Yeah. And is the
Correct.
Stormwater, you may have said this, but is the stormwater basically just from street drains in that adjacent neighborhood? Is that kind of where we're, and then it was normally going into those ponds? Is that the historical?
I glossed over that.
And so what's the treatment that it's going to undergo before it gets injected?
Yeah, I think that slide's coming right up.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, then I'll
but yeah, so these green lines are, you know, it's going into probably some catch basins, something, and then it's going down these the system here, and there's some outfalls. So it's this upper pond. There's another outfall that then it goes into the lower pond there. And so it's just filtering through right now. And so they're gonna put the treatment facility, and I've got a picture of that too, or a schematic, but it'll be down in this lower pond, and it's kind of a 4-stage treatment process. Okay. And then it will go from there back up into the injector well after it's been treated. But I'll show you a picture, I think. So yeah, that's kind of
okay. Great, thanks. I didn't mean to jump ahead.
No, it's all right. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So this is the treatment setup. So this is that lower pond that we were just looking at. So it'll come out through an outfall from the upper area. The first step is they call it, these are the names that they gave in the application, but slow sand in pond filtration. So this is mostly that first step to help with the turbidity and the suspended solids that are coming, you know, with that initial flush. There's a AQUIP enhanced filtration system. It's layered inert organics for sorption and filtration of metals and organics. So that's kind of the second process that it'll go through. And then it's a granular activated carbon system that further removes the unwanted organics. And then lastly, it goes through the ultraviolet UV disinfection system. So for the bacteria and viruses. And this is, so anyway, and once that's done, then it goes to the actual wellhead for injection.
Kevin?
Yeah.
Would you drink it?
I think I would. I don't know. Well, let's monitor it first.
No.
I've got it.
Let's determine whether it's good enough to be injected into my drinking water before it gets there.
Let's do that. Yeah, so that's the next. So the monitoring schedule is, I don't have all of them here, but it's literally 100 plus analytes. So that's the initial, and this is done annually. They monitor for this full suite of analytes, and anything that we require from a UIC permit, this is way above and beyond that, and it includes all of those analytes. Oh yeah, Phil, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I
Yeah.
note that this project, not you, this project has an injection well and a recovery well.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's related to the treatment train here. I know that in Oregon, if you're going to inject it and recover from the same well, the DEQ requires a technique-based treatment system. So it's a municipal style treatment technique is your permitting requirement. If you're not recovering it from the well you injected in, then it's a criteria-based, a performance-based treatment train. Like, you just have to remove the contaminants to the acceptable level, MCLs, whatever. Do you know which one this is, this treatment system? Is it technique-driven or is it performance-driven?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I can find that out. I actually haven't heard those terms used.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with that with a project that I'm working on in Eastern Oregon, where we were going to take raw water from a surface water feature, and the requirement was that we had to build like a municipal style water treatment plant if we wanted to recover the water from the same well. Once we split up the injection and recovery system, then it suddenly just became about demonstration of removal of pathogens, for instance.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know that, how it would be classified. I'll look into that though.
Was there any background on why there was two different wells? I know that it's typically you don't drill two. Typically you try to get it all done with one. Do you know why two wells evolved on this project in the first place?
I don't know the history of them or what their initial use was. There's actually another well there too that's super deep. That was gosh, I don't know if it was a monitoring well or not. There is another well there too, and I'm not sure why they were initially drilled. I don't know if Justin or anyone knows from the water resources side when they drilled them.
Well, thanks, Ken.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I feel like I used to know, and I cannot recall the exact story of how those three wells went in. I do know.
I think it's in the application. They have a history of it too, and I know it probably says it, but yeah, not sure of that either. Sorry. Anyway, so there will be a large suite that's analyzed, like you see this. This is the timeline they have for the pilot project. November, you would do that huge suite of 100+ analytes, and then there's a smaller subset that are monitored every month. So that's kind of the monitoring schedule. And if there's any exceedances, then injection has to stop immediately. So that's kind of how the monitoring schedule is going. It's, as I mentioned, actually for 1200 U permits, the only things that DEQ currently with the current permit language requires monitoring is lead and pentachlorophenol. So that's the only two, and they only have to do that once a year. So it exceeds that by far in terms of the number of times things are being sampled. So Richard, to go back to your question, would I drink it? Let's see what these things say first.
Kevin, I'm really bothered by the 500-foot statement that the injection will only encompass no more than a 500-foot diameter and 3 feet thick, when we're talking 20 million gallons of water shoved into an aquifer. History tells us that other ASR wells, such as the ones that Beaverton has, and I have a chart here that shows their original ASR well affected wells up to 3 miles away as far as the static water level. And when you inject 20 million gallons, they don't expect to extract that whole 20 million. Normally, it's only about 90%. So over time, you're going to continually push that treated or the partially treated water further and further out into the aquifer. At least common sense tells me that.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point. I know they've done feasibility studies on can you actually fit those volumes in there. I think that's part of the pilot project too, to see that their calculations are right. But yeah, and I think right now the aquifer from when they did the background levels, this is not potable water, but it's suitable for irrigation. So they know the background on that. And so they've got to treat it to the highest beneficial use, which is actually drinking water, because it's a domestic use well. So the thought is, at least this is the plan for them, is to treat it to drinking water standards, which would be well above what the current background level is.
Will that be in writing, Kevin?
Huh?
Will that statement that it has to be treated to drinking water levels?
Yes,
That
that
be
is
put
in,
into
that is in there. That is already in their application, that language that was approved. They stated the highest beneficial use was drinking water, and so that's already written in there.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and just so you all know too, anyone, these are public records documents. Anyone can have the permit, the application documents, all the attachments, all the files that were submitted with it are available for everyone, so everyone can read through those.
Well, part of my angst is I contacted the project manager at Beaverton, or at least I tried to, left two voice messages. That was 2 weeks ago, and requested information and have heard nothing back.
Well, email me or I can get you what you need, probably.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I think that's about all I had. That's kind of the setup. And so in terms of the project, what they're analyzing for, the monitoring schedule, that plan. As I mentioned, these projects are starting to pop up a lot. I just wanted to throw out another example, a little bit different. This is out in Eastern Oregon, also working with the water resources folks too, and had a limited license application as well. This is in 15 Mile Creek out in Duford, just kind of south of the Dalles. So 15 Mile Creek, what they want to do here, just from the schematic, it's kind of similar. That they're going to take water from the creek during the winter months when it's not in use or unallocated, and put it into a kind of a detention pond, a settling pond in the shallow aquifer. They know the background water quality in the unconfined shallow aquifer. They know the background water quality of the Columbia River basalt aquifer there, but they're going to divert water from the creek, put it in this infiltration basin as kind of the pre-treatment, and then they're going to pump that water out of there and inject it into the Columbia River basalt aquifer. They will then be able to use that for irrigation. And also the big one here is they'll put it back in the stream during the summer months for stream flow enhancement and also temperature control. There's native coho, steelhead, Pacific lamprey, a lot of species that are getting kind of whacked out there, especially from the water temperature. So that's another project that's ongoing. But we're seeing a number of these start to pop up. And so, you know, I think if, just from my standpoint, if as long as you can treat things above the background groundwater quality, these are really good projects. I mean, that stormwater, especially, you know, it's just going out to it's not being used. And so if we can find a way to clean it and help us augment irrigation needs and things like that, it's, you know, water's a big issue now, so we'll see. But that's all I had, folks. Like I said, I can make this available. I'll also put some, Justin, if you let me put some links in here, I can add that, and that way people will have some more resources, and also have my my phone number, email. If you guys need anything, just give me a shout, and I can track things down. People call me a lot, so.
I have one last question, Kevin,
Sure.
and maybe it's for you and Justin together. In both of the diagrams you showed, the schematic one from Doofer and the well diagrams from the Beaverton project, seem to show open intervals of wells that span multiple water-bearing zones in the Columbia River basalt. And I know that this is kind of becoming an issue, and it's a big issue in some areas, say like Mosier, where, you know, interconnecting zones with different heads is an issue, but also potentially injecting, you know, water into sort of different water-bearing zones is, you know, maybe could be an issue. I don't know, but in the Beaverton project, they are using wells, it seems to me, if I understand correctly, that are basically kind of repurposed or found wells, you know, and not drilled specifically for this purpose. And so my question is, I know you guys do a lot of really good work in scrutinizing the water quality of this water, but is there much effort that goes into scrutinizing the well construction? Do these wells even meet the current well construction standards? So I guess, Justin, so that's, I'm kind of funneling off in Justin's direction here, but does your agency, you know, kind of have a role in this, Justin, looking at these wells from that perspective? Or am I just being a armchair regulator?
No, that is an extremely good point. And I don't know about this particular schematic for Doofer.
It's a cartoon. I recognize that.
Right. I don't think that that's been drilled yet, and I don't know that we've got any specific information, but as it's drilled and installed, we'll certainly be looking at the pressure profiles from any multiple flows that are there. For the Beaverton wells, we actually went out with our downhole geophysical tools and assessed whether or not there was any flow between those units at ambient conditions, at least. And we found essentially I can't remember exactly. I shouldn't say right now because I can't remember, but the overall picture was we satisfied ourselves that the head profiles, again, at least at ambient conditions, were equivalent, and we didn't see any borehole flow. And so we were confident enough to go through with the permitting for testing in this system. I guess we actually had two profiles. One, the USGS actually did few decades ago, and one WRD did a few years back. I think from my perspective, the concerns you bring up are really valid. If there's different head fields and there is flow between aquifers at ambient conditions, then no, that doesn't meet well construction standards, and we would decline to permit any new uses in a well that doesn't meet those standards, that is commingling those aquifers. I think it also brings up just some challenges for the project proponents in that, depending on if you're injecting or pumping and you're raising the head or lowering the head in a well bore, we've kind of diagrammed out situations in which you can inject into one zone and pull from another, just because of the way the head differences are in the relationship of the head in the borehole. So it's definitely something that we're looking at and considering, and encouraging the project proponents to do the same, and do our best to understand what's happening there.
Well, that answers my question, and it sounds like it's definitely on your radar, and you're thinking about it, which is great. Thanks.
Yep.
And thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Is there any other questions for Kevin?
I have one.
Go ahead.
On your filtration systems that you have in the Beaverton project, what do you do once that sand's saturated with contaminants? Where is that going to go?
That's a good question. I'm guessing they probably did say something about that, but I don't know where they would take it. But for instance, when we decommission UICs, a lot of times there's sediment from years that builds up in these like in a dry well, and we require that they clean out the sediment and test it or evaluate it for contaminants, and sample it. But regardless, it has to be for whatever those contaminants would be. And in this case, you kind of know what they are because they've tested what's typically in stormwater here locally. But you have to take that to a designated facility that can handle that. So you can't just go spread it around the corner or something, or put it out on a field. You actually have to take it to a municipal, like a waste facility, and dispose of it properly, like for hazardous waste. So I'm assuming, I shouldn't assume, but that is probably how they're going to have to handle this, because you're right, it's going to start picking up contaminants.
And then I have one last question, if you don't mind. On your
Sure.
On your high risk area, you have written down there that it only requires annual sampling. It seems to me that that's under your water pollution control system, that screen that you had up. It seems to me if it's that high of a risk, why are you only requiring annual sampling on that? Especially when we have such a change in the weather here, as far as runoffs from these places.
Yeah, a good point. And that's probably the simple answer is that's what's in the permit language currently, and that's what's required. Now, when for those municipalities that have the individual permits, those are 10-year permit terms, and so when they expire, one of the things we look at is emerging pollutants of concern. So if we're seeing different things than what the original permit language had, we can change that in the new permit. That's ongoing right now. There's I think Gresham expires here at the end of the year. Bend expires next year. So we're looking at that type of, do we need to change the language? We could also, that's a good point. We could change the sampling requirements to the frequency. But currently that's what's in it, and that's why it's annually. As well as that, like I said, that 1200 U permit, the permit shield, the statewide coverage expires in 2025. So maybe, we can look at that too. when we update that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Kevin.
You got it. Thanks for having me, guys.
And we will move on to Justin with the groundwater allocation.
Okay,
You might unshare your screen, Kevin.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can do that. Stop share. Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
all right. So I want to transition. We're going to revisit a topic that we talked about last meeting, which is our process to update the way in which we review new applications for groundwater permits, which we've also been calling our groundwater allocation project. Want to do a couple of things today. We had talked about public outreach meetings. We have narrowed down our concept to a plan. We're going to be presenting in 4 locations around the state. Those are all going to be hybrid meetings, so folks can join online as well, but they can be in person if they want. We're going to be in Salem in a couple weeks, the week of September 19th. Then we will, the following week, the last week in September, we're going to travel out to Bend on a Wednesday night and out to La Grande on a Thursday night. Have meetings there in the central and the east side. And then the first week in November, we're going to travel down to Medford and have a presentation down in the southwest corner of the state. And then a final 5th presentation that will be online only. All of the public meetings where we're in person are going to be in the evenings. 5:30 to 7 timeframe, I believe, is what we settled on. We haven't set a time, 5:30 to 8 is when we'll be there. And we haven't set a time for the online only meeting, but we're planning to have that during the workday to make sure that we can also get input from all the folks that deal with water for a living and are doing it as part of their workday. So that is our plan. And essentially our goal with these public outreach meetings again is to invite as many folks as we can to come in and provide us with their input on ways in which we can improve our process to be more protective of senior groundwater and surface water users. So again, we talked about that last time, and I heard a few things from the GWAC committee. I just want to summarize real quick, kind of the broad things that I heard from you folks was that, first of all, we need to clearly name the process and who the revised rules will affect. So tried to do that already by saying that this isn't our groundwater allocation project, or that's the shorthand for it. But again, this is a project to look at the rule set by which we perform a review of new applications for groundwater rates. And we'll continue to make sure that we're kind of filtering our jargon through our public outreach consultants and our internal communications folks to make sure we get that as plain language as we can. I heard a couple comments about being cautious not to go too far, to identify as best we can where water is available, where it's not, and to consider the potential for short-term permitting and use. So wanted to acknowledge those comments that we heard, and that kind of dovetails with the last overarching goal, which is, we need to somehow figure out how we're going to identify and deal with uncertainty and or thresholds for impacts, right? And that, I think, is the real key, and what I at least really would like to hear from the public about and get public input on during these outreach meetings, so that we can gather up input before we go out and draft rules, so we can kind of get, what we're trying to do is make sure that we get as much input as we can before we put pencil to paper, so we aren't anchoring anything down to, hey, just comment on these rules and these, these draft rules only, as the rules advisory committee will eventually do. So the public meetings are going to be spent mostly as a facilitated listening session. So again, we're going to have our consultants, the room's going to be set up to accept kind of public comment testimony out loud. We're also going to have some tables set up where if folks don't feel comfortable, getting up in front of the group and saying their piece, they can come and provide kind of one-on-one input to a number of folks we'll have taken notes. And we'll be there to answer questions, but mostly we want to have this as a listening session. So in order to queue up the topic to get the most useful input, I've drafted out, I don't know, half dozen 8 slides, and I wanted to run those by you folks to show you what I'm going to be presenting to, or an early version of what I'm planning to present to open up these meetings and kind of give the background, to both get your input on the slide set and anything that you see right off the bat that I can do to improve that, and then B, to kind of go through a second round of input from folks to see if that setup triggers other thoughts that you might have. So before I share those slides, which should, ideally only be about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because again, I want to get out the main concepts and select input. Any initial thoughts or comments from folks on this topic? Okay. So let's see here if I can find the right screen to share and what I got up here. Okay. And so I'm assuming now you're just seeing the slide and not all my notes. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right. So again, this is going to be how, well, this isn't going to be the official opening. We're going to have Doug Woodcock or others up to welcome, and our consultants to give kind of how things are laid out. But I want to lay out the background concepts of our current kind of how the source of water to wells works, and how we allocate water today, and what we're looking at changing in the future and why. So 2 slides to try and be as clear as I can about how groundwater works and what we're up to here. So essentially, and I'm sorry, I just got a note that is my whole presenter view visible to you folks here? Yes, okay. So I shouldn't have done that swap slides thing. That's fine. You guys can see my notes if you like, but we'll try and do this officially. All right. So so what I want to share is, as concisely as possible, I want to get across the idea that, first of all, groundwater is part of the hydrologic cycle, that it is a component of water flowing through the system, that there's a recharge area where precipitation or other sources of water enter the ground, that water flows through the ground, and that water has a discharge point. There's some end point in general to all these flow paths, and typically that discharge point, especially in most settings in Oregon, or many settings in Oregon, is discharged to seep springs, stream bottoms, and that forms a component of surface water flow that we call base flow. It's the water that's flowing in a creek this time of year when it hasn't rained in a few months and there's no snowfield or dam releasing water or melting water out up above, right? The reason that many of our creeks and streams flow year round is because the rain from the winter months is infiltrated, has flowed through the ground system, and is seeping out into those stream beds. And then I want to make sure that we get across that, okay, so we have this groundwater component of the hydrologic cycle. Water is flowing from a recharge area to a discharge area. And once we put a well in to pull water out, right, it's a great resource. That's a 3-dimensional flow field. You can have a piece of property pretty much anywhere and drill a well to some depth and get a source of potable water. And that's a pretty amazing resource to have. And we have to recognize that that well is pulling water out of a flow path that is otherwise going somewhere else, right? Without development, it's not that the groundwater is just sitting there, it's flowing to discharge someplace else. It's supporting springs and streams and other systems. So way back in 1940, Charles Tice, who was one of the early pioneers of groundwater science, pointed out that all water discharged by wells is balanced by what he calls a loss of water somewhere, right? We're taking water out of a cycle that's otherwise flowing from somewhere to somewhere. And later on, through additional work of many contributors, we understand that the way in which pumping a well collects water out of the subsurface is from a balance of this dynamic storage as well as stream flow depletion, and that with increasing pumping time, we initially, when you turn on a well, it initially takes water out of this dynamic storage, and in relatively short order, the proportion decreases that we're taking from storage and increases in how we're pumping water that would otherwise be distributed to stream flow. So this graphic comes out of a really great compilation piece, circular from the USGS that I've got a picture of here, stream flow depletion by wells and understanding and managing the effects of groundwater pumping on stream flow. So that's a resource that we'll have available. It's both detailed and I think accessible, at least in the early parts. So I want to make as clear as possible this concept that A, groundwater is a flow field, B, pumping groundwater impacts that flow field, right? It's just like pumping surface water. If you take some out, that's less for folks downstream. So next two slides are groundwater allocation and how we've been managing groundwater. So again, we've recognized how groundwater is a component of the hydrologic cycle, and we have set a number of rules and policies in place to manage how we allocate that, how we issue groundwater rights to folks for use. And the way that our current rules are issued, we look at relatively short-term impacts from individual users on other existing senior users of the resource. So we look at an irrigation season, and we look at wells that are relatively close to streams that are hydraulically connected within a mile. So If impacts would accrue significantly during an irrigation season, which is also related to how close a well is to a surface water stream, we might deny a new permit because that stream might already be over allocated. But if those impacts accrue over time, then we often will issue water rights. And over the last 50 years of issuing water rights, we're now starting to see that there's less and less surface water availability, and senior users of that surface water that have been, had those rights exercised for 50 or 100 years are seeing less and less base flow as we allocate more groundwater. So allocating to relatively new uses is having an impact on water availability for senior users. Yeah. And therefore, kind of seeing this and seeing how the impacts have accumulated in our conversations with the commission over time, back last December, the commission gave the department direction that they wanted to see us recommend an update to the groundwater allocation review process, how we issue groundwater rights, to be more protective of senior users, existing users. And they identified that as a high priority that they wanted to act on quickly. So they asked us to get that done this year. It's been a bit longer process than they would have wished, but we're working as quickly as we can to identify potential rule changes that we can put forward for their consideration. So again, our primary goals are to start to look at allocation, and maybe I see that I should keep wordsmithing here. We want to address the issuing of new groundwater rights to take a more long-term and basin-wide perspective, right? We need to ask, is water available for additional consumptive use? And also we want to establish criteria to support definitive findings. So currently we've talked about this checkbox where we don't necessarily have the data at the appropriate scale to be to make a finding one way or the other on over appropriation or not. We want to set up the criteria in such a way that we can make a definitive finding one way or the other with the data that's available. And so just to give you a quick view of where we're going, we have convened an internal team that started to compile all of the various rules that intersect with groundwater right issuance, to make sure that if we change one thing, we understand how that may or may not flow down to various other aspects of the water right system. They've been working on that, and they'll continue their work through drafting proposed rule here in the next few months. After we have a proposed rule, we will convene a rules advisory committee to provide input and go through the process for reviewing and adopting new rules. And our current schedule is to look at proposed rule adoption by the commission early in 2023, in the spring of 23. And again, of course, this will be a presentation for these public meetings, and the public meeting fits in right at the top here of this series of steps in which we want to gather information now early before we draft the rule to get as many perspectives understood and incorporated as we can. So with that, the rest of these public meetings are going to be spent asking for participants' perspective on updating the groundwater right issuance rules. Again, the direction from the commission is we need to take the long-term and cumulative effects on the senior users into account. And so I really want to encourage folks to give comments that explicitly address how or what they believe the department can do to be adequately protective of senior users as we issue more groundwater rights into the future. And so with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and open it back up and see. Again, that was what, 12 minutes. So relatively quick to try and get a lot of information out. And I'm curious to hear how that struck folks and what you might change or improve or re-emphasize.
Anybody? Go ahead, Phil.
I have a couple of comments, Justin. And perhaps you did this, and if so, go ahead and ignore it. But you eventually, like I think 2 or 3 slides in, you have a slide that sort of frames up your problem statement. There's 2 maps. One's the surface water availability, and that's good. There's no critiques there, but I think hitting that point, like in your first slide, like why are we doing this, and making that just like a 1 or 2 sentences, and then before you get to that, so right up front, make sure that that's really driven home why the department is doing this.
Yep.
And you may have done that, but it might need just to be emphasized.
Yeah.
The second thing is, and it's just a curiosity. It's not a comment or a critique or a suggestion. It's really maybe a curiosity. Because I spent half my time working in Washington State, where this would be framed a little differently. Whenever I hear we're doing this to make sure that future allocations protect senior users, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, what's under that umbrella? And there's an absence of discussion of aquatic habitat or species in that. And so I'm wondering, is that sort of encompassed, or is this specific because protection of senior users is part of the mission statement, and so this has to be specific to senior water rights holders?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's both, and I should clarify that, right? Because, well, at least in so much as we have in-stream water rights set from the 80s to present day, right? And those are senior users, right? Those are senior rights.
Okay.
So it's inclusive of both in-stream and out-of-stream users.
Yeah, so maybe at some point, define what's under the umbrella. That'd be helpful for some folks, anyways.
Go ahead, Marshall.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, Justin, I think you're homing in on it in a good way. I think it was a good presentation. Again, I think as we talked about last time, that allocation word is confusing, and I like your kind of revised wording there. I kind of agree both of everything what Phil just brought up. I hadn't thought about the idea of moving those maps up to the front. That makes a lot of sense. And I also like kind of bringing the physics and in there. I would in your graph that you showed after the Tice quote with the 2 sort of exponential, that's getting a little bit out there maybe, but I would highlight the fact that this, I don't remember how the actual axes were labeled, but just say, hey, this means that we're going to see this amount of pumping is really coming from stream flow. This other curve shows how much is coming from storage, and this is the point I want to make. You need to kind of drive home the point that change in storage is commonly manifested as a lowering of the water table, and that it's sort of, once it's stabilized, it's there. It doesn't go away, and it has already changed. And I think that it's important to sort of drive home the point. This means people are having to go deeper to pump water, and it's a burden on groundwater irrigators, and it's a big burden on particularly on domestic well owners who don't may not have 50 grand to drop on a new well. Anyway, so I guess it's a long-winded way of saying, kind of hit home that real impact on irrigators, because that's what we're seeing in the Columbia, in the Harney Basin and the Columbia River basalt. In fact, I know you want to keep the slide count down, but maybe a graph of a hydrograph of a well saying this is kind of what over allocation might look like. Anyway, but that was it. Yeah, that was it really. Just sort of highlight that change in storage isn't just sort of a theoretical thing. It actually is a tangible thing for water users. I agree also with Phil about the lens different people look at this through differs whether they're a water user, be it a domestic water user or an irrigator, and it's going to be different. They're going to see it through a different lens than somebody on the conservation side is going to look at it. So you're kind of walking a fine line there. You don't want to walk into a particular room and start talking about fish in wetlands as the driving force here, or you might lose some people. I think you have to kind of definitely hit both, but recognize you're kind of you're gonna have to read the room on that one, I guess. But I always look at it from the water user's perspective, because those are the people that it's their
no,
their
absolutely.
livelihood.
And the idea is, the goal is to get all those folks in the room. That's
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's what we're going for. So,
Ivan, I have a question.
yeah, go ahead, Floyd.
It seems like the department spent a lot of time on this new allocations. What kind of outreach have they done on senior water right users to see if they can curtail some of their use or be a little bit more conservative on the water that they're using?
Well, that's a good question. And I don't know exactly the answer, Floyd. I think that just anecdotally, I believe that our water masters are generally chatting with folks about that. And specifically, I know that the Harney Basin place-based planning group has talked a lot about that. And I think that Mark Owens mentioned that specifically last meeting, that if he could deficit irrigate, he could still grow X% of his crop and have some income with significantly less water. All that said, we can do that outreach, but the way the statutes are set up now, that's a voluntary action, right? And so we absolutely want to make sure that folks understand it's a limited resource, and the more they conserve, the better. Yeah, and I guess that's your question, right? Your question was not what's the law, but what's our outreach, and we've certainly been trying to do that. I guess I can think of one more example for you. We make specific allocations to groundwater users in 2 of our critical groundwater areas in the Umatilla Basin, in the Stage Gulch and Butter Creek areas. And that's a process by which we solicit annual input from senior users, understanding that they have the right to pump a relatively large amount. They might have implemented efficiencies or planted a crop that doesn't have as high of a consumptive use, or any number of things where they can use less than their permitted rate. And we do a lot of individual discussion of, you're not risking your water rights to forfeiture by conserving, right? Like as long as you've got infrastructure ready, willing, and able, you're not going to risk forfeiture by putting less water on your field because that's a benefit to everybody and the department recognizes that benefit. So that's another big outreach component, is just addressing folks's concerns about forfeiture. So.
On some of the permits that I see issued, pumping tests are required, and on it, it basically is, you have to own up to what your water rights are. So it seems to me that if I got a water right for pumping 400 gallons a minute, that I would want to own up to 400 gallons a minute that I had it in the future. But it seems to me that if I could irrigate for 200 gallons, but yet you're asking somebody to own up to the 400 gallons. Why is that?
Well, I guess so. A two-part answer for you. So yes, we have pumping test requirements. Those are dominantly for us to gather information about the hydraulics of the aquifer and use that to inform future allocation, right? So every pump test we get, we learn something about how water flows through the aquifer. When we look at a new application, we look at all the pump tests we've gotten around there, we average out the hydraulic parameters, we use those to model as best we can the potential impact of a new use. So what we say for those pumping tests is, we want you to pump at, the higher rate you can pump at for those 4-hour tests, the better the water level response information we get, especially at the precision at which most folks are taking measurements. So we encourage folks to pump at the rate that they're permitted to, because theoretically they should have all the infrastructure to do that and we'll get the best information. Okay, let's set that aside. There is also the proof component, right? So this is the 3-step water right process. You apply for a right, you get a permit to build that out, and then you have a certified inspection by which you make a claim of beneficial use, and you say, I have taken this water, this public resource that I've got a permit to use, and I've put it to beneficial use, and I am applying for a certificate that says that is now my water right. The certificate will only be issued for the amount that you actually build out. So one of the things that you said that caught my attention was, once folks have that permit for 400 gallons per minute in your example, they are really reticent to let any of that 400 gallons per minute on paper go, because that is now valuable, right? I think that in the past, my understanding was folks would often apply for more than what they needed. They could always build out less. They'd get their certificate for what they grew, and that was their certificate. And that was an older model where your water right was, just to grow on your land. And nowadays we see a lot of, I don't know, a lot's probably not the right word. People are making financial transactions with their water rights, right? And that's set up a new paradigm. And the department has responded by getting tighter on, apply for only what you need, not, we'll give you a fishing license and you catch as much as you can with that license and prove up on, actually what you used. So I feel like I'm getting a little far afield from what you asked, Floyd, but I guess I want to just recap. There's 2 different components of this pumping to prove up your maximum use. The pump test is a data gathering exercise that helps us understand how the system works and to make better allocation decisions, better water right permitting decisions. And the proof is the point at which folks show what they've grown, what they've built out, get a certificate, get that water right that becomes, essentially a property right. So has that addressed where you were going, Floyd, or do I need to recalibrate?
I guess what I was looking at is it's if you need to own up to your water right, you're going to want to use as much water as you can. It just eliminates conservation and trying to conserve on usage.
Yeah. I mean, that's a Western water law tension, right? Is this concept of use it or lose it that seems to value using as much as possible, or else you'll have some what are they? I'm searching for the term that's used for. Anyway, I agree with you that the laws are set up on the face of them to encourage use, and the department is doing everything that we can to say, look, yes, forfeiture remains a process on the books, and if you are ready, willing, and able to use the full face value of your water right, you can still conserve water on a year-on-year basis without risk of forfeiture, right? And so, but again, that's voluntary. That's voluntary.
Marshall, do you have something?
Well, just a comment. At the last meeting, you used the term property right.
Yep.
And a groundwater right, any water right goes with the property, but when you use the term property right,
Yep.
I think it has a little different meaning to most people. I don't know what the legal definition of a property right is, but I think property rights sort of, when I think of my property rights, they're sort of my sacred thing and nobody can take them away. But a water right is really a license granted to a person by the people of Oregon to use a public resource. It's not really, is it accurate to refer to a water right as a property right? Because that has a lot of emotional
Absolutely.
content for a lot of people.
Yep. Absolutely.
If I'm, from my perspective, I can describe a water right as a property right. It goes with the property, but it's different than a lot of other rights. It's sort of a license that you can lose, under certain conditions. I don't know. Just something after our last meeting last time, I was rolling that around in my head and I'm going, was that right? Really? I don't know. So just think about that, and I'll leave it at that.
No, it's an astute observation. I am not using that term flippantly, and also I am not the best qualified to explain exactly the nuances, because you're right, it is conditional, right? Like it can be taken away, and there is a due process component that goes through it to where it can only be taken away through a critical groundwater allocation, as I understand it, through the various case law. And even then it's not taken away. It's just that you aren't allowed to exercise it. Like the right is yours and you own it, and it's got a priority date. You might not be allowed to use it.
Well, here's the way I think about it. A property right, in my way of thinking, is something that I have by virtue of the fact that I own a piece of property.
Yes.
And so if I just go out and buy a piece of land, I have certain property rights.
Yes.
Using water is not one of those rights. I have to go through a process to get a license from the state, that we call a water right, to use water. So that's in my way of thinking, that's the difference. A property right is something that's inherent in my owning a piece of property, and the ability to use groundwater, whether even if my, or surface water, even if my property abuts the river, it just doesn't go with the land. It's a separate deal, that I have to go through to obtain. So I don't know. That's the way I think about it. And I think a lot of people that aren't in the water use, that don't use water or aren't familiar with this, they're going to hear that property right term and go, oh yeah, I can use the water. It's my property right. You know, the ground is like in California, maybe it used to be, or maybe still is, that groundwater is a property right, but that used to be kind of how they managed it. But that's never been really how it has been here in Oregon. It belongs to the people of the state, you know.
Yeah. Yep. I will look up the exact nuances and come back with a better
over time.
No. No.
Just don't use the term.
Well, I think the one thing I think you got to be careful about, Justin, is saying that if you're not using your maximum water right, or your maximum gallons per minute you can use, and that you're going to take it away from them. I think you got to be careful telling people that, because then they don't want to go out there and put irrigation systems in and this kind of stuff that does conserve water. And that is still a very, very good way to do things. And it saves water, it saves power, it saves labor, it saves all these things. And so I think you got to be careful about telling people you're going to take it away if you're not using it all, because it doesn't promote conservation measures.
Right. And if that didn't come across, I did not do my job right, because I want to absolutely say that the department supports conservation, as you know, to the fullest extent. And it seems like I should get, I'll have a agenda item maybe at our next meeting or 2 meetings from now. I'll get Dwight French in here to help out, and we could talk about the nuances of conservation and how the department looks at that, and how the laws and rules intersect. So it's an important topic, and I think the more I can give a precise description of it, the better we can all be at communicating that to the various folks we speak with.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah,
One
just,
more, and then we
just
better
to
move
follow
on.
up. Yeah, I'll shut up. To follow up on your comment, Ken, I think it's a really good point, and it's something to highlight. As far as I know, you know, the department never, you know, even when people have meters.
You've kind of quit, Marshall. You might have to turn your video off.
Oh yeah, okay. You guys have never just throttled back somebody's water right because of a water use reporting thing or anything, have you? I mean, particularly individuals. I don't think that you know, non-use is really applied much at all. So I mean, people could take some solace in that, I think, or reassurance in that you guys just traditionally don't do that.
Yeah, so I guess I don't know exactly what the numbers are as far as cancellations. I would say rarely, not never, and I believe that in general it's initiated by other groups, right? There has to be somebody that comes in and says and makes a claim or an affidavit. I will say that in the Harney Basin specifically, in preparation for rulemaking where we will have a critical area, we want to ensure that all of the water rights that we deal with at the beginning of the process are valid and in use. And we've gone through a process to find, for example, permits that have not had claims of beneficial use associated with them, and that are past their completion date, right? So permits issued in the past where we haven't received any notification that, yep, this permit's been developed out and we want a certificate. And we've proactively sent letters to those folks and said, hey, you know, we issued this permit 10 years ago. It was supposed to be developed 5 years ago. We haven't heard anything from you. And we're going to start a cancellation process because we're assuming this hasn't been built out. And then there is a process for them to rebut that and say, oh no, sorry, I actually was and I'm using this, and so on and so forth. So I only want to say that to be precise, not to say that there's a huge threat of cancellation. And again, we do want to do everything we can to promote efficient use, right? Like we want to promote conservation by from the most senior to the most junior, and do the best we can to spread around what we have. So.
Okay. Well, any other questions or comments for Dustin? It is 11, a little after 11. We probably better move on here, probably. The next one is the committee member updates. I have one right off the bat, and that is, I think both Marshall and Phil, you guys wanted those websites and stuff for the TID Sigma, and I do have them. I forgot to get them to you, but I do have some websites. I don't know which way's the best way to get them to you, if I go direct or go through Justin.
Yeah, if you send them out to me, Ken, I'll make sure they get to the full committee, and we'll post those links in the meeting minutes too, like we did for the June meeting when there was questions about links. I stuck them in there, and that way they'll be available to the public or anybody listening online as well.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else?
Now, I wanted to, in particular, thank Kevin for coming on today and going through that ASR.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
My pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks again for having me.
Anybody else? How about any public comment? And Justin, you'll have to help me with that because I can only see so much of the screen.
Sounds good. I see that Janella Ingram is still with us, and I think that she is the only guest that's still on that might have public comment.
Okay.
I have no public comment, but thank you for the invitation.
Sure thing.
All right. Well, if that's it, I guess we're probably adjourned. That's probably it. Anybody got anything else they want to bring up, or not? We're adjourned.
All right, looking forward to those allocation meetings. I'll be on at least one of those, Justin.
Yeah,
just
me
to see how
too.
that goes.
Yep. Perfect. Excellent. I was going to make a pitch that I hope to see you folks there, and would appreciate your input at those meetings as well as in this venue. And we'll come back in our next meeting in November probably and give a wrap up about how those went and what we're doing next. So,
Sounds good.
all right. Thanks,
Good job,
folks.
Justin.
Again, thanks, Justin.
Yep.
Bye
Thank
now.
you all. See
Thank
you
you.
later.
Bye.
Take care.